Welcome to Twilight Terror Stories. Twilight is not just the end of day, it's the beginning of something else. A time when the shadows stretch and fear takes its first breath. You've stepped into that moment now, and the stories are waiting. Let them find you. It surfaced from the depths of a sea chest, a relic bequeathed by my grandfather, initially dismissed as mere brittle detritus, an error in judgment. Elias, that's my name. By trade, I'm nothing grand, but by calling, an actor, chasing the phantom applause in cramped community halls and basement black boxes. The stage is my altar. My own voice, shaping lines that resonate, is a peculiar music. Roles are skins I eagerly inhabit. Yet this script was alien tissue. Barely 3 weeks have dissolved since I breached the dusty sanctum of his attic, liberating the chest's secrets. Not moth-eaten linens or faded portraits, but this manuscript, pages foxed and bound crudely with twine. No title graced its cover. Instead, the opening page bore a sigil inked in black, a warped geometry, like a circle collapsing upon itself. There, amidst dust motes dancing in my flashlight beam and the coffin's stale air, I began to read. The words felt wrong, grating against the mind. They spoke of entities slumbering before time, of rites steeped in shadow, punctuated by a refrain, a chant that coiled through the text like a serpent. How it came home with me remains a blur, a lapse in caution. An unpublished oddity, I reasoned, perhaps a challenge for the tongue, fodder for some stark minimalist staging. Thus, it entered my apartment. My sanctuary is modest. 2 rooms breathing around a diminutive bath, the silence typically punctuated only by the low thrum of the refrigerator. That evening, under the solitary glare of a floor lamp, I gave the text voice. The first passage was clumsy. Words caught in my throat, the phonetics of these primordial names resisting familiar cadence. Lines, though clipped, landed with the weight of stone. By the time the first act concluded, ice feathered my skin. The air held no cold, yet a shiver traced my spine. Residue, I assured myself of the script's unsettling aura. I closed its covers, sought refuge in the flickering inanity of the television. Dawn broke, revealing the manuscript squatting on my coffee table. A flicker of revulsion, then an inexplicable magnetism. Dismissal warred with a strange compulsion. The morning stretched vacant before me. I yielded. Before the bedroom mirror, affixed to the closet door, I positioned myself, seeking to sculpt my expression to the text's demands. The lines pulsed with intensity, evoking a power ancient and terrible, demanding obeisance. Then came the phrase, stark and resonant, "I summon thee, my mind is threshold unto thy presence." I spoke it, and a sharp click echoed from the hall, the distinct sound of a latch engaging, a door settling shut. My heart hammered against my ribs. Silence followed. The hall stood empty. No draft stirred the air, yet the sound had been undeniable. I checked each door. The bathroom portal hung slightly open, perhaps as it was before. A forced chuckle escaped me, hollow. Returning to my room, the frantic rhythm in my chest refused to subside. The ensuing days blurred. A tightrope walk between mundane employment and these clandestine rehearsals, driven by no audience but an internal goad. A compulsion gripped me. The lines demanded perfection. Each time I lifted the brittle pages, sweat slicked my palms. I forced myself upright, script trembling in my grasp, voice cleaving the quiet air. Sometimes the hairs on my neck prickled, the distinct sensation of unseen scrutiny. Other times, a faint chink-chink, like loosening chains, drifted from the adjoining room. The building's groans, I rationalized, the neighbors' nocturnal rearrangements. Yet the sounds seemed tethered to one specific passage, the one concerning invocation, the beckoning of the nameless. One evening found me deep within the second act. A monologue unfurled, detailing rites prescribed, the mechanics of tearing wide a portal. I reached the precipice. I trace the sigil, my voice is the offering. As the words left my lips, a violent crack erupted from the kitchen. I flinched, heart leaping. Rushing in, half expecting an intruder, I found only my wooden kitchen chair overturned, splayed legs accusing the ceiling. The apartment was sealed, the deadbolt secure. Logic offered no solace. My hand, unsteady, righted the chair. A clammy sheen broke on my brow. Enough. The script lay abandoned for the remainder of the night. Several nights hence, drawn by the need for space to physicalize the role, I commandeered the living room. Clearing the floor, I began anew, pacing as I spoke. Act 1. My gaze kept flicking towards the shadowed hallway, the nape of my neck alive with the phantom touch of eyes. Floorboards groaned beneath my weight. A tremor invaded my voice as I recited lines of supplication, of yielding volition to the slumbering watchers. Suddenly, the overhead bulb stuttered, its light faltering, dimming to an amber pulse before reviving. My breath hitched. I pressed on. Approaching the act's conclusion, a glacial current of air kissed the back of my neck, intimate, like breath. I whirled, windows sealed, balcony door bolted, no vent nearby. Yet the chill clung, intensifying, setting my jaw trembling. Imagination, I muttered, the word dissolving in the charged air. The cold deepened. Teeth chattered uncontrollably. Dropping the script, I fled to the bathroom, splashing water on my face. It felt unnervingly warm against my icy skin. My reflection stared back. Haggard, pallid. A hiatus was imperative. The following day, work was a fog. The script exerted its pull, a siren song in my thoughts, blurring the edges of spreadsheets and deadlines. My focus frayed. Midday found me abandoning my post, drawn inexplicably homeward. Inside, curtains drawn against the mundane afternoon, I retrieved the manuscript. My pulse drummed a frantic rhythm. The pages exuded a faint, mildewed scent. A dull ache throbbed behind my eyes, yet I plunged into the third act. Its tenor was darker still, culminating in a final chant demanding resonant, commanding delivery. I uttered the first few syllables, and the apartment's electricity wavered again. A static charge lifted the fine hairs on my arms. My breathing grew shallow, chest constricted. I forced myself onward, repeating the phrases. The building groaned around me, punctuated by phantom footfalls from the ceiling overhead, impossible on the top floor. I ignored it. My throat felt like sandpaper. A gulp of water offered brief respite before I resumed. Then, distinctly, the sound returned. A faint, dry scrape, like chains dragging across bare floorboards emanating from the hall. It swelled, insistent. Setting the script aside, I crept towards the sound. The hallway lay empty, yet the scraping persisted, growing louder until I whispered, Enough for today. Silence fell instantly. Sleep became a forgotten country. Lying in the dark, the script's alien cadences echoed relentlessly within my skull, an internal loop refusing silence. I paced the confines of my living room, an unseen pressure bearing down on my shoulders, catching myself murmuring the lines aloud, unbidden, script untouched. They were etching themselves onto my very neurons. A week bled away in this state before the conviction solidified. I had to perform it, all of it. A bizarre hope flickered. Perhaps completion would grant exorcism, peace. One evening, I transformed the living room. Furniture shoved aside, lights dimmed low, a single chair marking stage right. A deep, steadying breath, and I began from the first haunting word. My voice, initially thin and reedy, found its footing, sinking into the persona woven by the text. Through the first act, the lamp reprised its stuttering dance. Faint rappings emanated from within the walls. My mouth turned to dust. Still, I pressed on, my voice swelling to fill the space, chasing away the phantom scraping that seemed to slither along the baseboards. The second act brought the return of the cold draft, now a deliberate current coiling around me. Gooseflesh pebbled my arms. My breathing grew ragged, yet the lines flowed. A strange pressure built in my ears, muffling sound as if submerged. My fingertips prickled with pins and needles. Shadows writhed in my peripheral vision, though no light source moved. Entering the final act, my skull felt clamped in a vise. My heart hammered a frantic tattoo against my ribs. My eyes burned, dry from infrequent blinking. Breath became a conscious, difficult effort. I faltered on a line, repeated it, louder. A distinct crash echoed from the kitchen. Ignored. Words forced past dry lips, a faint metallic tang blooming on my tongue. I pushed through the final invocation, my voice echoing strangely in the small room. My lips quivered, but the archaic phrases emerged. The last lines approached. My legs turned to water. I clutched the chair back for support. Voice shredded to a rasp, I delivered the final sentence. I carved the way. I yield myself unto the watchers. In that instant, a frigid gale ripped through the room. Curtains billowed violently towards the ceiling. The lamp flared and dimmed. I staggered backward as the cold, sharp as glass shards sank into my flesh. And then the whispering began. Myriad voices, indistinct yet omnipresent. A sibilant tide flooding the apartment. My gaze fell upon the stand-in mirror angled in the corner. It reflected not just the room, but faces. Pale visages, eyes like hollowed sockets, row upon row of silent spectators pressed against the glass, a spectral audience assembled within its frame. Bile surged in my throat. I wrenched my gaze away, yet felt their collective stare, a palpable weight upon my shoulders. Movement became impossible, limbs leaden, unresponsive. My hands spasmed, loosened their grip on the script. Pages fluttered to the floor like wounded birds. I tried to cry out. Silence. My mouth hung uselessly open. The whispering swelled. A cacophony rebounding off the walls, setting my teeth on edge, filling my ears with white noise. Another blast of icy air tore past, rattling the furniture, setting the lamp into a frantic pendulum swing. Breath tore from my lungs in shallow gasps. I doubled over, sharp, electric jolts spiderwebbing down my spine. My eyes darted back to the mirror. The faces seemed closer now, their silent mouths somehow shaping the whispers that filled the air. A hideous fascination held me captive, my gaze locked onto theirs. With immense effort, I shuffled backward, spine pressed hard against the unyielding wall. The frantic drumming of my heart echoed in the sudden quiet. Sweat beaded on my brow, instantly chilling on my skin. My clothes clung damply. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing a ragged breath. When I opened them, the mirror held only my own reflection, a mask of stark terror. Silence descended. The lamp stilled its arc. The curtains drifted back to place. The oppressive cold began to recede, replaced by a cloying stillness. I swiped a trembling hand across my forehead. My legs remained unsteady, but the immediate paralysis eased. Surveying the room, scattered pages, the overturned chair, trinkets dislodged from shelves, the chaos felt secondary. The acute sense of presence, however, had intensified. It stood beside me now, just beyond the edge of sight, an invisible companion. I tried to move towards the door, each step an effort, like wading through unseen currents. The feeling of imminent contact, of something reaching from behind, prickled my skin. At the threshold, hesitation seized me. Flee? But the thought of carrying this into the hallway, potentially infecting the building, felt like a violation. My hand rested on the doorknob, knuckles white. My eyes scanned the room. Nothing stirred, yet the certainty of not being alone was absolute. My own body felt burdened, draped in an intangible weight. The air hung thick, stale, tinged with the bitter taste of my own fear. My throat worked, raw. Finally, a whisper escaped. "It is finished." I listened, braced for the whisper's return. Only the heavy silence answered, amplifying the frantic pulse in my ears. Abandoning the living room, I sought the sterile refuge of the bathroom, locking the door firmly behind me. My hands trembled as I twisted the tap, letting cool water sluice over my fingers. I splashed my face, then met my reflection in the cabinet mirror. Pale, sweat-sheened, hair plastered to my forehead, eyes wide pools of residual fright. I focused on breathing, on the drip of water from my chin, coaxing my racing heart towards normalcy. The physical chill receded, but the room's atmosphere remained charged, occupied. An invisible tension hummed in the small space. Back, pressed against the cool wood of the door, I sank to the tiled floor, drawing my knees to my chest. Tears pricked, hot and sharp, but I refused them. After an indeterminate time, I rose, legs still shaky, and unlocked the door. The apartment was utterly still. Pages lay strewn across the living room floor like fallen leaves. The lamp cast its steady, warm glow. No shadows danced, no chains rattled, yet the profound sense of observation persisted, unwavering. Mechanically, I crossed the room, gathering the scattered leaves of the manuscript. My mind raced, replaying the final moments, while my eyes darted nervously around the seemingly empty space. Nothing moved. I stacked the pages, placing the bound text back on the table. A visceral certainty warned me never to read it again. I stood there, breathing raggedly, surveying the quiet disruption. Tension knotted my shoulders, my neck stiff and sore. The performance was over, every line uttered. Yet the presence felt solidified now, less an intrusion and more permanent fixture, clinging like damp cloth, making my skin crawl. My gaze fixed on the impassive lamp, arms hanging heavy at my sides. With leaden effort, I propelled myself towards the bedroom, each footstep dragging through thickened air. I extinguished the living room light, pulling the bedroom door shut behind me. A subtle draft whispered past in the corridor, Goose flesh bloomed anew. Once inside, I collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed, staring up into the familiar darkness. Every sound seemed amplified. The refrigerator's low drone, the sigh of my own uneven breath. Would I ever truly inhabit solitude again? Closing my eyes offered no escape, conjuring only phantoms in the blackness, faint susurrations near my ear. My body remained coiled, unwilling to yield to rest. The final line echoed, branded into memory. I carved the way. I yield myself unto the watchers. A fool's utterance, a regretted invocation, but spoken nonetheless. And now I am quite certain I am never alone, even in an empty room. There is no clearer way to state the truth of it. The city exhaled me late onto my own doorstep. Bone-weary, legs throbbing from the day's relentless pavement pounding, I eased the front door open. Its side shut behind me, sealing me into the apartment's profound hush. Only the street lamp's spectral wash filtered through the flimsy living room curtains, painting the gloom in shades of gray. Keys met the console table with a muted clink. My jacket slid off, leaving shoulders knotted and aching for release. The sofa's embrace, the television's blue flicker, perhaps just the cool clarity of water. A few dragging steps toward the promise of the couch, and then a sound shattered the stillness, shrill, insistent, the old landline perched on its dusty end table. My pulse leaped, a startled bird in my chest. A relic, this phone, utterly obsolete in the age of the sleek device humming in my pocket. I hadn't paid for the service in years, hadn't even plugged its cord into the wall jack since rearranging the room weeks ago. The dangling wire, a loose nerve ending, flashed in my memory. Drawn by the impossible summons, I navigated the gloom. There it sat, a black, dust-furred carapace vibrating faintly on the table. No tether snaked to the wall jack, yet the ringing pierced the air, sharp, undeniable. A weight settled in my sternum. Hesitantly, my hand closed around the cool plastic of the receiver. Lifting it felt like disturbing a grave. To my ear, I pressed the silence, broken only by the rasp of breathing. Slow, ragged, then a voice, male, low, gravelly as dragged stones. It spoke as if through a throat raw with sickness. It knew the blue shirt, the worn jeans, the scuffed boots I'd shed minutes before. It recited them like an inventory. It described the corner table at the cafe, the discarded newsprint, the exact change scattered beside my empty cup. It detailed the contents of my grocery basket. Apples, milk, that specific brand of crackers. It knew the casual brush of my fingers against the iron railing downstairs this morning. The compulsive triple check of the apartment doorknob before I descended. Rooted to the spot, receiver slick with sudden sweat, I offered only silence. Each recounted detail raised the fine hairs along my arms, tightened the knot in my dry throat. My gaze flickered to the phone's base. The cord lay limp, disconnected. A void opened in my thoughts. Words failed me, my fingers quivering against the plastic. Then the voice shifted, dropping lower still. "I know your secrets," it rasped, followed by a slow, guttural chuckle that coiled sickeningly in my gut. Before any sound could escape my lips, the presence vanished. Dead air hummed in my ear. I lowered the receiver slowly, listening to the profound nothingness, and carefully replaced it in its cradle. Time stretched, measured only by the frantic pulse in my neck. For a long minute, I merely stared at the inert object, the tension in my legs a painful thrum. Snapping the lamp on flooded the room with harsh light, confirming the impossible. No connection to the wall. I yanked its power cord too, holding the plug like strange evidence. This machine had no business making a sound. My mobile showed a blank call history. Outside the window, the street lay deserted, slick under the sodium lamps. Pacing the small confines of the living room did little to quell the frantic rhythm in my chest. In the kitchen, I gulped tap water straight from the glass, the coolness a stark contrast to my internal heat. Listening to my own ragged breathing in the sudden, oppressive silence felt like eavesdropping on fear itself. Fatigue, I reasoned desperately, hallucination born of exhaustion, but the vibration beneath my fingers, the chilling intimacy of that voice, the impossible accuracy of its knowledge. These were not phantoms. They were horribly, undeniably real. The glass clinked against the countertop. Back in the living room, I jabbed futilely at the phone's buttons. Lifeless plastic. The line utterly dead. Defeated, I collapsed onto the couch, eyes tracing patterns on the plaster ceiling. Sleep was a distant shore I couldn't reach, punctuated by jolts awake, glances at my mobile's glowing digits, and apprehensive stares towards the silent sentinel on the end table. It remained dormant through the long hours. Dawn brought no relief, only stiffness and a profound weariness. Dressing was a slow-motion ritual, my gaze repeatedly snagged by the phone, silent, mocking in its uselessness. Should I discard it? Hefting its surprising weight, I inspected the back. Dust clung thick around the base. A panel revealed an empty battery compartment. No power, no connection. Utterly inert. Yet, with a sense of performing a pointless exorcism, I carried it to the bedroom, secreted it within a deep drawer, and turned the key. Containment, perhaps disposal later. The rituals of the day unfolded. Shower, clothes, commute. I attempted to banish the memory, push the gravelly voice to the periphery, but it lingered, an unwelcome echo. Work became a struggle against distraction. The recalled details, the railing, the coins, the triple-checked lock, sending tremors through my focus. Was I being watched? The city streets felt suddenly hostile. Every glance over my shoulder, every face scanned in the anonymous flow, every furtive check of mirrored shop fronts yielded nothing overtly sinister, yet the feeling persisted. At my desk, the familiar tasks felt alien. A subtle tremor plagued my hands. Rough night, I mumbled to a colleague, offering a vague excuse. Didn't sleep well. To mention the call, the impossible phone, felt like inviting ridicule, crossing into madness. Lunch was a solitary affair, punctuated by obsessive checks of my mobile. Silence. My homeward pace quickened, the familiar streets now a gauntlet of imagined scrutiny. Up the stairs, key poised at the lock, I held my breath, listening. Only the building's usual groans. Inside, the routine. Keys, jacket, sofa. The television's drone offered a flimsy shield against the encroaching dread. Hours crawled by. Then, near the same hour as the night before, the sound returned. Not from the living room, from the bedroom, from the locked drawer. My throat constricted. Rising stiffly, I crossed the threshold. The drawer remained shut, yet the ringing emanated from within, louder, more insistent than before. Trembling, I pulled it open. There lay the phone, receiver jittering in its cradle with each strident ring. Power cord and wall cable still absent. A moment of paralysis then, compelled, I lifted the receiver. The familiar, ragged voice scraped against my ear. "Tried to hide me, did you?" It described the hesitant way I'd just opened the drawer. It knew about the detour I took coming home, the specific streets. It named the sandwich consumed at lunch, pinpointing the exact minute I'd finished. "Saw you looking over your shoulder," it rasped, followed by a laugh, harsher this time. Cold sweat prickled my neck. "Who are you?" The question emerged as a thin reed of sound. No answer. Instead, "You're nervous, sweating." A pause. "I see your hand shaking." Instinctively, I glanced at my free hand. It trembled violently. "What do you want?" I forced out. Only heavy, deliberate breathing answered, then the sharp finality of a click. Utter silence. I replaced the receiver, breath catching shallowly in my tight chest. A band of pressure tightened around my forehead. Seizing the phone, base and all, I marched to the kitchen, fury momentarily eclipsing fear. Rummaging beneath the sink yielded a small hammer. The first blow cracked the black plastic casing. The second shattered it. I tore the receiver from its cord, smashing both base and handset relentlessly against the linoleum until only jagged shards of plastic and twisted metal remained. Sifting through the debris revealed nothing unusual. No hidden circuits, no peculiar power source, just the mundane guts of an old telephone. I swept the fragments into a plastic grocery bag, knotted it fiercely, and shoved it into the darkness under the sink. Closing the cabinet door felt like sealing a tomb. I leaned against the counter, chest heaving. Sleep that night was a fortress besieged. Bedroom door locked, living room TV murmuring inanely as a bulwark against silence. Drifting off took hours, my heart hammering a relentless tattoo against my ribs. Morning light sent me scrambling to the kitchen. The bag of plastic shrapnel remained undisturbed beneath the sink, a sliver of relief, fragile as glass. Calm, I told myself. Be calm. The day's routine felt hollow. On the street, every passing face seemed a potential mask for the watcher. No one met my gaze. Work was a blur of feigned concentration. The thought of involving the authorities surfaced, then sank under the weight of absurdity. My disconnected phone rang. "Officer," twice, so I smashed it. No proof, only the ravings of someone unraveling. I had destroyed the evidence. Silence was the only option. Wait. Perhaps, finally, it was over. Evening descended uneventfully. Pasta, eaten standing by the kitchen counter, tasted like ash. I forced myself not to dwell on the preceding nights. The television droned, but my eyes kept darting to the empty space on the end table, a void marked only by a faint outline in the dust. Maybe smashing it had worked. The hours bled together. Fatigue began to drag my eyelids shut before the flickering screen. Then a new sound intruded. Not a ring, but a low, insistent buzz. I pushed myself upright, ears straining. It led me to the hall closet by the entrance. Flinging the door open revealed forgotten clutter, and nestled within it, an old cordless phone set, years unused. Its base station sat unplugged, its internal battery surely fossilized by now. Yet the cradle light glowed faintly, and the handset vibrated against the shelf, emitting that dull electric hum. My hand closed around the vibrating handset. A profound reluctance warred with a grim sense of inevitability. I pressed the talk button. Instantly, the gravelly voice filled my ear. "Saw you smash the old one." A pause, thick with malice. "No, you haven't been sleeping. Heard you breathing so hard last night." A lump formed in my throat, silencing me. I could only listen. "I'll keep calling," it promised. "I enjoy watching you fret." It chuckled, a dry rustle. "Thinking of running? You won't get far. I know your routines." It then recounted my evening's movements, choosing the stairs over the elevator, crossing the avenue to bypass a cluster of loiterers, entering the corner shop only to leave empty-handed. Vertigo washed over me. My knuckles whitened on the plastic. "Who are you?" I whispered again, the plea lost in the void. Ignored. A slow, deliberate inhale and exhale through the speaker. "Tomorrow," it stated flatly, and the line clicked dead. With fumbling fingers, I wrestled the battery from the cordless handset, adding its components to the bag of debris under the sink. Tying the knot tighter this time, I carried the bundle out, down the echoing stairwell, and into the shadowed alley behind the building. The heavy lid of the dumpster slammed shut with grim finality. I scanned the darkness, listening intently. Only the distant city hum. No footsteps, no watchers. Back inside, the deadbolt slid home with a decisive click. Every window lock checked. Then, a frantic unplugging. Television, router, mobile charger, severing connections, trying to starve the unseen entity. All lights extinguished save for a single, naked bulb in the hall, a lonely sentinel against intrusion. I paced the confines of my apartment, a caged animal, forehead slick with cold sweat, palms damp and clammy. The following night found me waiting on the couch, a vigil in the near dark. No landline, no cordless. My mobile, powered down, rested heavy in my pocket, a technological desert. Yet, as the appointed hour arrived, a sound arose. Not a ring, not a buzz, but a crackle. Static. Coming from the bathroom. Pushing the door open revealed the source. A small, cheap radio perched on a shelf, used occasionally for morning headlines. It was switched off, its plug dangling uselessly from the back. But from its speaker issued a faint hiss. Lifting it, I jiggled the tuning knob, shook it gently. The static abruptly ceased, replaced by that dreadful, familiar breathing. "No, you threw them out," the voice rasped through the tiny speaker. "Doesn't matter. I find a way." My arms went weak. The radio almost slipped from my grasp. I clutched it tighter. "Stop trying to get rid of things," it continued. "I can use anything, like those trousers. Same ones as yesterday, aren't they?" A pause. "Take a look in the mirror." Slowly, compelled, I turned towards the medicine cabinet mirror. A stranger stared back, pale, haunted, framed by dark hollows beneath the eyes. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. "Always here," the voice breathed from the radio. "Every night. Same time. You can't stop it." The guttural laugh returned, echoing briefly before the radio fell silent once more. I set the device down carefully on the edge of the sink and retreated, backing out of the bathroom on trembling legs. In the hallway, my back found the cool plaster of the wall, and I slid down its length until the floor met me. Deep breaths hitched in my chest, refusing to calm the storm within. My fingers fumbled for the mobile in my pocket, thumbing it back to life. Who could I call? What could I possibly say that wouldn't sound like delusion? My radio talked to me. Proofless, powerless. I sat there on the floor, the phone's screen casting a lonely glow, staring into the shadowed emptiness of the living room. A knot tightened low in my belly. My skin felt icy. Sleep was impossible. I simply waited through the dark hours for the next violation. Silence reigned until the following evening, punctual as fate. This time, the television screen flared to life unbidden, displaying a blizzard of static. Through the speakers, the voice emerged, calm, almost conversational in its rough timbre, recounting the day's futile maneuvers, the different lunch spot, the altered commute, the heavier curtains I'd pinned over the windows that morning before leaving. "Doesn't matter," it stated. "I always know." Remote clutched in my hand. I stabbed uselessly at the power button. The screen remained alive. Scrambling behind it, I ripped the plug from the wall socket. The static hissed on, uninterrupted. The remote clattered to the floor as I stumbled back. The voice merely laughed, a sound that scraped nerves raw. My heart pounded. Breath grew ragged. I reached behind the set again, yanking the captive cord with such force I nearly lost my balance. It changed nothing. Clamping my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut offered no sanctuary. The sound permeated bone and flesh. I sank to the floor again, gasping, waiting for the torment to cease. Minutes later, the laughter subsided, the static dwindled to nothing. Opening my eyes, I saw the screen was black. Silence rushed back in, vast and terrifying. I remained huddled there, paralyzed by a fear that had become certainty. Tomorrow night, it would come again. The city's relentless grind had worn Alara down to a frayed nerve ending. Escape wasn't a desire, it was a primal need, away from the cacophony, the demands, the suffocating press of humanity. A secluded cabin, buried deep within an arboreal wilderness, promised sanctuary. Weeks of scrimping had purchased this fragile hope. A handful of days steeped in silence, a space to simply exist, to inhale air untainted by stress. The journey itself felt like shedding layers of a former life. Asphalt surrendered to gravel, then gravel dissolved into a barely there dirt track that coiled deeper and deeper into the forest's embrace. Civilization evaporated behind her. The world narrowed to the tunnel of trees flanking the path. At its terminus sat the cabin, diminutive, rustic, yet possessing an undeniable allure. A simple structure, sleeping quarters, a rudimentary kitchen, a necessary bath. Its crowning glory was the porch, a wooden platform gazing out into an endless, undulating sea of green. A perfect hermitage. That initial day unfolded like a slowly remembered dream. Her phone remained entombed in her bag, a silenced oracle. Wandering aimlessly among the ancient trees, she drank in the profound quietude, a balm to her fractured thoughts. For the first time in memory, clarity surfaced through the usual mental static. As dusk painted the sky in bruised purples and oranges, a small fire crackled merrily, casting dancing shadows. Dinner was uncomplicated, eaten under a canopy of nascent stars. The only soundtrack, the sibilant whisper of wind through pine needles. Later, cocooned inside, the click of the lock echoed with finality. Sleep came easily, a deep, untroubled surrender she hadn't known in months. Dawn arrived crisp and clear, but the tranquility shattered the moment she unlatched the door. There, incongruous against the weathered porch floorboards, lay a folded square of plain paper. An errant piece of litter, perhaps, carried by the breeze. Her fingers closed around it, a tremor of unease starting deep within. Unfolding it revealed stark, simple words that struck like ice. "I saw you sitting by the fire." Alara froze, the note a lead weight in her hand. Logic scrambled for purchase. A prank? But who? The isolation was absolute. She hadn't glimpsed another human since leaving the main road. Her gaze swept the perimeter, probing the dense tree line, searching for eyes she suddenly felt boring into her back. Nothing. Only the indifferent trees and the sighing wind. Retreating inside, the sturdy lock felt suddenly inadequate. She forced the paralysis away, tucking the unsettling missive into a drawer, a dismissed anomaly. Coffee was brewed, routines attempted. Yet the peace was irrevocably poisoned. Every glance darted towards the windows, scanning the silent woods. The porch seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The forest, once welcoming, now felt watchful. Its myriad sounds, a snapping twig, the mournful howl of the wind, jolting her heart into a frantic rhythm. Always there was nothing, just the woods, and a silence that now felt heavy with unseen presence. Nightfall brought a meticulous ritual of securing the locks, fingers double-checking each mechanism. Darkness pressed against the windows, amplifying every creak of the old cabin. Lying rigid in bed, ears straining against the silence, she battled the rising tide of fear. It's nothing. An overactive imagination. But the image persisted. Someone standing unseen in the darkness, close enough to observe her firelit solitude, close enough to leave a calling card without a sound. Morning light offered little comfort. Hesitation warred with necessity before she could bring herself to open the door. The instant she stepped onto the porch, her breath hitched. Another note. This one wasn't simply dropped. It was perched deliberately on the railing, an intentional placement. Her hands shook as she retrieved it. "I watched you check the locks last night." The words sluiced through her veins like glacial meltwater. The watcher wasn't just passing through. They were lingering, observing, cataloging her fear. Again, she scanned the silent panorama of trees, a desperate, fruitless search for the source of this torment. There was only the empty clearing, the cabin a tiny island in a vast, indifferent wilderness, and the inescapable certainty she was not alone. Back inside, the lock clicked home again, a futile gesture. Panic began to claw at the edges of her reason. Flee? Call for help? The phone remained stubbornly inert, a useless brick. The car felt miles away, separated by that treacherous winding track. Just a twisted joke, she told herself, the mantra wearing thin against the mounting dread. The remainder of the day dissolved into a vigil by the windows, eyes fixed on the unmoving woods, waiting for a sign, a movement, anything. Nothing disturbed the stillness save the occasional, indifferent rustle of leaves. Exhaustion gnawed at her, yet sleep felt impossible as darkness reclaimed the woods. She sat bolt upright in bed, the single lamp casting a weak circle of light, every nerve fiber attuned to the slightest sound from beyond the thin walls. Sometime in the gray, pre-dawn hours, fatigue must have claimed her. She surfaced abruptly, roused by the first tentative fingers of light probing the window pane. A fleeting moment of normalcy, A desperate hope that it had all been a nightmare evaporated with a soft thud from the porch. Heart hammering against her ribs, Ilara crept to the window, peering through a sliver in the curtain. Another white square lay starkly against the wood, directly before the door. A visceral reluctance warred with a morbid compulsion. She had to know. With trembling fingers, she undid the lock, snatched the paper, and retreated into the relative safety of the cabin. Unfolding it, the message hit her with physical force. "You didn't sleep well, did you?" The world tilted, closer, bolder. They had been there, on the porch, while she slept fitfully inside, perhaps even peering through the glass. Her gaze flew to the clearing, frantic, desperate. Still nothing, just the trees standing sentinel. Enough. The money, the lost peace, none of it mattered anymore. Survival was the only imperative. She moved with frantic energy, stuffing belongings haphazardly into her bag, clothes unfolded, toiletries forgotten. Escape before proximity became presence. Reaching beneath the bed for her discarded shoes, her fingers brushed against something unexpected. Paper. Crumpled, tucked into the shadows. A cold dread coiled in her stomach as she smoothed it open, the tremor in her hands making the words dance. "You look tired." Nausea surged. They had been inside. While she slept, vulnerable and oblivious, the Watcher had breached her final sanctuary, close enough to leave this intimate, chilling observation. The air felt thick, unbreathable. Packing ceased to matter. Keys clenched in her fist, she bolted, barely registering the click of the lock behind her, a meaningless reflex. She scrambled into the car, the key fumbling against the ignition. A terrifying second of silence stretched, pregnant with the possibility of failure, before the engine coughed, sputtered, and roared to life. Gravel spat from beneath the tires as she reversed violently, fishtailing onto the narrow track. The drive back was a blur of speed and terror, the winding road a dangerous ribbon unfurling before her. Every glance in the rearview mirror expected a figure, standing motionless in the dust cloud, watching her departure. Only the empty road and the receding trees stared back. She didn't ease her foot from the accelerator until the blessed sight of the main highway appeared, a lifeline back to the known world. Even then, she drove for miles, putting distance between herself and the violated sanctuary in the woods. Only then did the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen, her white-knuckled grip on the wheel relaxing fractionally. Months have bled into one another, yet the cabin, the notes, the suffocating sense of being observed remain vivid, etched onto her psyche. Who left them? What purpose lay behind the escalating terror? She cycles through rationalizations, a cruel prank, a disturbed local. But the cold certainty persists. It felt like more. It felt like scrutiny, a patient, predatory study. Sometimes, in the vulnerable quiet of the night, the phantom sensation returns, unseen eyes upon her. It feels as if some fragment of that watchful presence detached itself from the woods, followed her back to the world of noise and people, and waits even now. The full story remains locked inside her. She will never return. But the final note, the one discovered in the violated intimacy of her sleeping space, its messy, hurried script, echoes in her mind. Were they still out there, in the silent depths of the forest, patiently anticipating a return that would never come? The cheap neon heart of the "Open 24 Hours" sign pulsed erratically, bathing the rain-slicked asphalt and grimy convenience store windows in a sickly violet throb. 2 o'clock bled into the morning, and Silas, captive behind the counter, found his gaze snagged yet again by the obsidian sedan parked just beyond the light's reach. Hours it had sat there, a silent black lozenge of metal, engine breathing a low, almost imperceptible hum, its windows tinted to an absolute, impenetrable darkness. A discordant note in the symphony of the dead hours, it radiated wrongness, a feeling tightening in Silas's chest like a cold fist, the certainty that the night held a revelation he wasn't prepared for. 6 months. Silas had haunted this fluorescent-lit box during the graveyard watch, a tenure measured in lukewarm coffee and the shuffling feet of the sleepless. It wasn't a life, merely a means to stave off entropy, paying the rent on his meager existence. Most nights dissolved into a predictable rhythm. The quiet restocking of Technicolor chip bags, the rhythmic glide of the mop chasing phantoms across linoleum, the transactional chime of the register punctuating the solitude for truckers chasing horizons or souls adrift in insomnia's fog. But this night deviated. The sedan had materialized near 11, sleek and alien, utterly incongruous amidst the neighborhood's weary decay. Initially, Silas had conjured mundane explanations. A lost traveler consulting a map, perhaps engine trouble simmering under the hood. Yet, as midnight unspooled into the deeper hours, its unwavering presence metastasized from curiosity into a gnawing apprehension. He tried immersing himself in the mundane ballet of shelf-stocking, the practiced choreography of making things neat, but the car exerted a gravitational pull on his attention. A threatened downpour finally broke, commencing as a hesitant sprinkle before settling into a persistent glassy curtain that smeared the sedan's sharp lines, rendering the scene painterly, almost dreamlike in its menace. 1:30. Silas decided proximity might yield answers, or at least dispel the phantoms his imagination was conjuring. Announcing to the empty store he was checking the overflowing bins outside, a flimsy pretext, he pushed through the door. The damp, cool air was a brief mercy against the store's stale warmth. He made a deliberate show of wrestling with the plastic lids, eyes flicking sidelong towards the silent vehicle. The windows remained stubbornly opaque, reflecting the distorted neon like vacant eyes. But then, a flicker, a subtle shift within the profound blackness just as he turned back. Someone. Definitely someone inside. Retreating to the dubious sanctuary behind the counter, Silas wrestled with the impulse to dial the authorities. Yet, what concrete threat could he articulate? A car, parked legally, if unnervingly, for several hours. Dismissal felt certain. Better to endure, he reasoned. His shift concluded with the dawn at 6. Surely the enigma would resolve itself by then, vanishing with the shadows. But the night wasn't finished. At precisely 2:30, the spell broke. A rear door of the sedan swung open, disgorging a figure into the rain-streaked light. Even across the wet pavement, Silas registered the man's frantic energy. He stalked back and forth beside the car, a caged animal, fingers raking through damp hair, lips moving in silent, furious dialogue. Then, with startling abruptness, he pivoted and strode purposefully towards the store's entrance. Silas's pulse hammered against his ribs. He'd witnessed the spectrum of late-night oddities, the drunks and the desperate, but this man radiated a different frequency, a raw static that tripped every internal alarm. As the figure drew nearer, the flickering neon illuminated wild, skittering eyes that seemed to absorb everything and nothing simultaneously. His attire was disheveled, bearing the creases of prolonged wear, and a distinct tremor animated his hands. The bell above the door chimed, its cheerful jangle hideously amplified in the profound quiet. He paused just inside, a predator surveying new territory, his gaze sweeping the aisles before locking onto Silas with unnerving intensity. "Evening," Silas managed, the word catching in his throat. He aimed for casual, achieved strained. Anything I can help you find?" No immediate reply, only the weight of that disquieting stare. Then, a slow, deliberate advance towards the counter. "Do you ever get the feeling," the man began, his voice a low, gravelly thing, vibrating with suppressed energy, "that you're being watched?" Silas swallowed, the motion feeling loud in his own ears. Well, sometimes, I guess. Comes with the territory, working nights." The man leaned forward, invading Silas's personal space. A miasma of old perspiration and something metallic, unidentifiable, reached Silas. "No, not like that. I mean, really watched. Like invisible eyes are tracking every breath, every thought." An involuntary half-step back. "Look, friend, are you all right? Is there someone I can call for you?" A laugh erupted from the man, sharp and brittle as breaking glass. It made Silas flinch. "Call someone? Who? Don't you get it? They're all part of it. Every last one." Silas's fingers surreptitiously sought the smooth, cool plastic of the panic button beneath the counter's lip. A virgin device, never deployed. Tonight felt like its potential christening. "Why don't you tell me what's troubling you?" Silas offered, striving for a placating tone. "Maybe talking helps." The man's eyes narrowed to slits. "Help? You think you can help?" His hand darted inside his worn jacket. Silas's breath hitched. A cold certainty gripped him. Weapon. Instead, the man produced a severely crumpled sheet of paper. He smoothed it flat on the counter with trembling fingers, revealing a chaotic tapestry of frantic script, arrows, and crude diagrams linking disparate concepts. "See?" he insisted, a grimy finger stabbing at the paper. "It's a web. Government agencies, multinational corporations, the goddamn jet stream. They're pulling the strings, Silas. We're just marionettes dancing in their manufactured storm." Silas nodded slowly, deliberately, keeping his gaze fixed on the man, not the frantic map of paranoia. "That sounds incredibly stressful," he ventured cautiously. "Stressful?" The man's voice climbed, cracking. "It's sheer terror. Have you any conception of their reach? The lengths they'll go to maintain the illusion?" He was nearly shouting now, face flushed, flecks of spittle accompanying his words. Silas risked a desperate glance towards the door, praying for the mundane interruption of another customer, but the rain-lashed street remained utterly deserted. "Sir," Silas interjected, forcing firmness into his voice, "I need you to lower your voice. You're upsetting me." For a fleeting instant, the man looked startled, as if jolted back to his immediate surroundings. The momentary confusion hardened swiftly back into conviction. "Upsetting you? You damn well should be upset. We all should. They could have this place bugged right now. He resumed his agitated pacing before the counter, a low, continuous muttering escaping his lips. Silas watched, weary, his hand a hair's breadth from the button. Pressing it felt necessary, yet terrifyingly provocative. What cascade of actions might it unleash? Suddenly, the pacing ceased. The man spun back towards him. "Supplies," he stated, the shift in tone jarring. "I need supplies, non-perishables, water, batteries, enough for a while." Relief, potent and unexpected, washed over Silas. A task. Something normal. "Okay, sure. Grab a basket over there and I can point you in the right direction." As they navigated the silent aisles, Silas pointing out canned beans, jugs of water, and packs of D-cells, the man's monologue continued unabated, a torrent of conspiracy theories, shadowy cabals, and imminent societal collapse. Silas offered vague murmurs of acknowledgement, focusing on projecting calm while subtly maneuvering them back towards the relative safety of the register. Basket-laden, they returned. As Silas began scanning the items, the man leaned conspiratorially close once more, his breath hot against Silas's ear. "You seem decent," he whispered, the intensity returning. "Just a kid trying to get by. My advice? Disappear. Get off their radar while you still can. Find a place they can't touch. They haven't noticed you yet." Silas merely nodded, speech failing him. His hands trembled as he packed the provisions into plastic bags, hyper-aware of the man's unnerving proximity. "That comes to $78.50, he said, the numbers sounding thin and reedy. The man produced a thick, disorganized roll of banknotes, peeling off several worn bills and thrusting them at Silas. As Silas fumbled with counting out the change, he noticed the tremor in the man's hands mirrored his own. "Keep it," the man commanded as Silas extended the coins. "Consider it severance pay. You'll likely need it." With that part an enigma, he hefted his bags and moved towards the exit. Silas tracked his retreat, heart still a frantic drum against his ribs. Reaching the obsidian sedan, the man paused, turned, and looked back at the store one last time. Through the rain-streaked glass, their eyes locked. In that fleeting connection, Silas perceived something raw and complex beneath the paranoia. Profound fear, perhaps, or a soul-deep desperation. Then the man was inside. The engine roared, and the car peeled away from the curb with a violent squeal of tires, swallowed by the rain and the night. Silas remained rooted behind the counter for long minutes, staring at the vacant, glistening space where the car had been. The silence pressing in, his mind struggling to catalog the encounter. The remaining hours of his shift drifted by in a haze of residual adrenaline. Every chime of the door sent a jolt through him, a primal readiness for the man's return. But only the familiar pre-dawn figures materialized. Weary shift workers seeking caffeine, delivery drivers replenishing their trucks. When his replacement, Leo, arrived punctually at 6, Silas hesitated. Recounting the night's events felt flimsy in the burgeoning daylight, the sharp edges of fear softened by the mundane sunrise. Perhaps it was just a man unraveling, a solitary breakdown witnessed under fluorescent lights. Yet, stepping out into the cool, damp morning, the world felt subtly altered. The familiar streetscape seemed overlaid with a new invisible layer of significance. The veil, as they say, felt thinner. He walked home with deliberate slowness, the man's words echoing, refusing to be dismissed. "They haven't gotten to you yet." He tried to shake it off, label it the byproduct of stress and a disturbed stranger's rantings. But climbing the stairs to his apartment, an unfamiliar prickle traced his spine, compelling a glance back down the empty street, half expecting the glint of an obsidian sedan lurking in the periphery. That night was a fissure point. Silas handed in his notice at the convenience store shortly thereafter, citing a need for change, a desire for daylight hours. The unspoken truth resided in the anxious vigilance that had claimed his late shifts, the constant scanning of the parking lot, the low-level dread anticipating the return of that car. And sometimes, drifting in the quiet solitude before sleep, the question still surfaces, unwelcome but persistent. What if the frantic man, tangled in his web of perceived connections, had glimpsed a genuine thread? What if the eyes are watching? And what happens when the paranoia begins to whisper arguments that sound disturbingly like reason? Here it lies, the chronicle of my unraveling. Who could fathom that mere furniture, wood, and fabric might dislodge one's grasp on reality? Yet, I find myself a prisoner in my own living room, orbiting an antique armchair with the wary deference one might afford a caged predator. A frantic pulse hammers against my ribs whenever proximity becomes unavoidable. Some primal instinct screams of unseen hands poised to grasp. I, Elias, a collector drawn to the tangible whispers of history and old objects, procured this chair at auction, never imagining it would become the locus of a quiet, creeping dread. But the testimony of my own senses, however fractured, cannot be dismissed. Something is profoundly wrong. It materialized in my life a fortnight ago. An intimate estate sale, the air thick with dust motes dancing in slivers of afternoon light, attended with my friend Leo. Antiques, for me, possess a comfort and solidity, an anchor to bygone eras. This particular specimen arrested my gaze. Its velvet, once a regal crimson, now muted by time, its wooden arms polished to a satiny sheen by generations of repose. I noted the fraying filigree along the cushion's edge, the stout, carved legs bearing the patina of decades, perhaps centuries. The auctioneer's voice, a dry rustle, declared it late 19th century, likely continental European. That provenance alone was sufficient bait. My paddle ascended, a modest sum was offered, and with startlingly little contest the armchair was mine. Transported home, I settled it beside the hearth in my living room, a space already intimate, perhaps verging on crowded with its accumulated relics. Against the flickering firelight, the chair exuded an unexpected invitation, its crimson depths hinting at faded opulence, the worn armrest speaking not of decay, but character. A surge of collector's pride warmed me. After a cursory dusting, I succumbed, sinking into its embrace, tilting my head back to admire my acquisition. That was the precise moment the first anomaly occurred. An icy tendril slithered across the nape of my neck, sharp as a sliver of winter air through an unseen fissure. I sprang up, heart thudding, conducting a frantic survey of windows and vents, all sealed tight. The room's ambient temperature remained constant. A stray draft, I rationalized. Overwrought imagination, I insisted. I forced the incident from my mind. but the chill proved tenacious. In the ensuing days, every attempt to occupy the armchair was met with that same spectral breath upon my neck. I'd twist, searching for the source, a crack in the plaster, a misaligned floorboard, finding nothing. A deeper unease began to coalesce, a prickling awareness whenever I read or watched television nearby. It was the distinct visceral sensation of being observed, the undeniable weight of unseen eyes boring into my back. Quick, darting glances revealed only empty air, yet my skin crawled, palms grew slick, and breath hitched. Sometimes the feeling became so potent I'd leap up, compelled to sweep the entire room with my gaze, desperate for reassurance that wasn't there. One evening, perhaps a week after its arrival, pushed the boundary close to shattering. Seeking solace after a taxing workday, I sat ensconced in its depths. My shoulders ached. Leaning forward, I kneaded the tense muscles at the back of my neck. Abruptly, a soft, distinct pressure settled upon the chair's crest, directly behind my head, the unmistakable feel of a hand resting there. I vaulted upright, propelled by a jolt of pure adrenaline, my heart seizing. As I stared, aghast, the armchair executed a slight backward tilt before righting itself with a faint sigh of compressed springs, precisely as if an invisible occupant had just hastily risen. A wave of heat flooded my face, chased by a cold dread that tightened my chest. Sleep became a distant country that night, my eyes repeatedly drawn to the shadowed form of the chair, visible from my bedroom doorway. Dawn brought resolve. A thorough investigation was imperative. Wrestling the heavy piece onto its side, I scrutinized the underbelly, the webbing, the coiled springs, the layers of stuffing. I anticipated finding mundane debris, lost coins perhaps, or brittle fragments of ancient padding. Instead, snagged on a rusted spring, I discovered a peculiar scrap of fabric. It bore no resemblance to the crimson velvet. This was a coarse, dun-colored material akin to rough linen. Streaked across it were strange, dark markings, oily, indeterminate smudges that resisted easy classification. Not red, not brown, unlikely blood, yet profoundly unsettling. I stood, the small rectangle of cloth pinched between my fingers, its texture unnerving, oddly stiff as though saturated long ago with some unidentifiable substance. Was it remnant upholstery? A forgotten fragment of a previous owner's attire? A wave of revulsion washed over me. Sealing the scrap in a plastic bag, I sequestered it in a kitchen drawer, the thought of contact in the auction house dying on my lips. Explaining my disquiet over a stained piece of linen felt absurd, bordering on hysterical. Besides, what answers could they possibly possess? My discomfort, however, remained unassuaged. Merely traversing the living room induced a knot of tension low in my gut. I attempted to cultivate indifference, labeling myself jumpy, susceptible to suggestion. A few nights later, I invited Leo over, a casual evening of pizza and beer, hoping perhaps for external validation or dismissal of my fears. He sprawled on the sofa. I, steeling myself, claimed the armchair, projecting an ease I didn't feel. Initially, normalcy reigned. Then, an hour or so into our conversation, the familiar cold zephyr kissed my neck. I fought the urge to flinch, striving to maintain the conversational thread while the fine hairs on my nape bristled. Leo shot me a quizzical look. "You all right, Elias? You look pale." I managed a nod. Moments later, he excused himself. The instant the bathroom door clicked shut, A soft, deliberate creak emanated from the armchair, the sound of weight subtly shifting on the cushion. My pulse leaped. Rising slowly, cautiously, I watched as the chair rocked, a minuscule forward then back motion, as if settling after being vacated. Leo re-entered the room at that exact moment, catching me frozen, staring intently at the furniture. I mumbled something about stretching a cramp. He departed later, oblivious, but the image of that slight, autonomous movement was seared into my mind. Sleep, once again, offered little refuge. The following day, I experimented, relocating the armchair to a different corner, testing the hypothesis that drafts or uneven floorboards were responsible. The change in position yielded nothing. The oppressive aura clung to it, regardless of geography. Proximity bred tension. My shoulders instinctively tightened, a low thrum of nausea stirring whenever I drew near. Eventually, I ceased sitting in it altogether. That weekend, engaged in the ritual of cleaning, vacuum humming, dust cloth in hand, I postponed confronting the armchair as long as possible. Finally, needing to vacuum beneath it, I grasped the wooden arms. Their smoothness felt deeper, more profound than I'd initially registered. Ridges worn down by countless unknown hands, small chips marring the finish. Beneath the curve of the armrests, hidden from casual view, I discovered a series of deep, parallel scratches, frantic gouges, as though someone or something with long nails had gripped it with desperate force. The randomness, the violence implied in those marks sent a fresh wave of unease through me. I tipped the chair onto its back again, ostensibly to clean, but truly to re-examine. The springs gleamed with a faint patina of rust. No further fabric scraps were visible, yet the memory of the gray linen piece resonated. My breathing grew shallow. The phantom chill returned, despite the still air. Righting the chair hastily, I rushed through the remainder of my chores, pointedly averting my gaze from the damned thing. Several days passed in a state of uneasy truce. I avoided the chair, and it offered no overt disturbance. Then, returning home late one afternoon, weary from work, I entered the living room. Something felt off. The armchair sat slightly askew, nudged from its usual position. Had I left it that way? Drawing closer, my blood ran cold. The seat cushion bore a distinct indentation, shallow but undeniable, the precise shape left by someone recently seated. Wrinkles puckered the velvet, and I swear a faint, cloying odor hung in the air. Stale, cold, reminiscent of damp earth or a long-sealed cellar. My legs felt unsteady. I stared, transfixed, half expecting the impression to deepen, for the chair to shift before my eyes. Silence reigned, thick and watchful. After several heart-stopping seconds, I retreated. That night, attempting distraction with a film from the relative safety of the sofa, my hearing became unnaturally acute. Every settling creak of the old building, floorboards groaning, furniture sighing, sounded amplified, potentially sinister. Behind me, from the direction of the armchair, came a soft, rhythmic skreek. Skreek. Not the house settling, something else. Turning slowly, I saw it. The armchair was rocking. Gently, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably rocking on its four static legs, as if responding to a subtle shift in weight. My throat constricted. No earthly explanation presented itself. Galvanized by a mixture of terror and frustrated anger, I rose and approached it, heart hammering, palms damp. Standing directly before it, the motion ceased. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers brushing the velvet nap of the chair back. It felt unnaturally cold. I gave it a tentative push. It wobbled slightly in response to my force. Nothing more. Defeated, I stepped back. After verifying every lock on every door, I returned to the couch, only to feel, scant moments later, that familiar chilling breeze skate across the back of my neck. I whipped around. The armchair shifted, a fractional movement, so slight I might have doubted my vision, but it was there. A deliberate, mocking adjustment. Sleep, when it finally claimed me near dawn, was shallow and plagued by shadows, despite the lamp I'd left burning in the living room. A feeble ward against the darkness I couldn't bear to let envelop that chair. Morning light brought a renewed, almost obsessive need to understand. I retrieved the plastic bag from the kitchen drawer, unfolding the gray scrap of linen. The dark stains remained unchanged, inert, offering no olfactory clues, no stickiness to the touch, just indelible marks, soaked into the very fibers ages ago. Could it have lined a hidden cavity? Been torn from the clothing of someone who frequented this chair, perhaps in extremis? Futile online searches yielded nothing. The notion of forensic analysis felt disproportionate, yet the accumulating anomalies screamed for explanation. A call to a local antique restorer offered a sliver of hope. Masking my true anxieties, I described an old armchair with potential structural weaknesses, mentioning the discovered fabric scrap as an afterthought. He was heavily booked, but tentatively scheduled a visit several weeks out. Weeks. It felt an eternity, yet it was a date on the horizon. Until then, I resolved to wait, clinging to the possibility of a mundane explanation. Warped wood, eccentric springs, peculiar air currents. Deep down, however, a colder certainty resided. None of that accounted for the spectral breath, the pervasive scrutiny, the chair's subtle, unnerving animations. My living room became hostile territory. Television viewing migrated to the bedroom. Meals were taken at the small kitchen table, reading confined to my desk in the spare room. Passing the living room doorway felt like breaching a hostile border, the air thickening, charged with unseen awareness. The conviction that someone, something, sat in that chair, head turning slowly to follow my passage, became unshakable. My heart rate would spike. I'd hurry past. One evening, returning from errands, I unlocked the front door and stepped into the hallway. The living room lay to my left, submerged in twilight, save for the sodium glow of a street lamp filtering through the window. The armchair's silhouette was familiar, yet wrong. The cushion. It was deeply depressed, compressed in the unmistakable contour of a seated figure, though no figure was visible. I froze in the doorway, keys biting into my palm, knuckles white. The shape was human-scaled, an invisible weight occupying the space. My breath hitched in short, ragged gasps. Panic blurred the edges of my vision. With trembling fingers, I fumbled for the light switch, flooding the room with artificial brightness. The indentation remained. Heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my eardrums, I forced myself forward. As I approached, inch by painstaking inch, the compressed velvet began to rise, slowly, deliberately, smoothing itself out until the cushion lay pristine once more. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the distant hum of the refrigerator. A visceral twist in my gut sent me stumbling backward out of the living room, nearly collapsing in the hallway. Trapped. The urge to flee my own home warred with a stubborn refusal to be driven out. After composing myself for several minutes, I retrieved a heavy flashlight, marched back into the lion's den, and swept the beam across every inch of the armchair and its surroundings. Nothing. It sat inert, ordinary. Since that night, the debate rages internally. Dispose of it, exorcise it from my home. Yet, a paralyzing fear stays my hand, a nonsensical, irrational dread of reprisal should I attempt to move it, dismantle it, destroy it. It feels sentient, possessive. Madness, perhaps, yet the experiences are undeniable. The thought of fire, of splintering wood, flickers but remains unacted upon. So it stays, a silent, velvet-clad sentinel daring me, and it obliges, with small, insidious reminders, a creak, a chill, a fleeting shadow, just enough to keep the fear alive, simmering. The restorer's visit remains a week distant. I mark the days, praying for a rational, mechanical fault. But the conviction hardens. This is no simple malfunction. Tonight, I will sit in the living room again, bathed in electric light. My phone will be close at hand, poised to capture proof, tangible evidence against the encroaching doubt. Even if it confirms only my own fracturing sanity, certainty is preferable to this limbo. As I conclude this account, pen hovering above the page, the air behind me stirs, a subtle displacement. A familiar tingling crawls up my spine. I resist the urge to turn, yet I feel its presence, palpable, immense. The armchair, aware. My palms are slick, my stomach a Gordian knot. I swallow against a suddenly parched throat. Perhaps it is nothing. Perhaps my mind, strained beyond endurance, is conjuring phantoms. But I know what I have witnessed, what I have felt. That armchair is not merely old. It is occupied, and whatever resides within its faded crimson depths is here, beside me, watching, listening, waiting. For now, it remains in my home. Silence was the currency I sought out here, but my account is overdrawn. From the shadowed heart of my living room I hear it, a ragged punctuation in the night's long sentence. Faint, yet clawing its way through the walls. Close, too close. A knot tightens beneath my ribs, a familiar clench since sleep became a luxury stolen a week ago. This ragged vocalization, appearing from the ether in the deep hush of night, hasn't truly ceased since. It waxes and wanes, a tide of unease, a persistent murmur reminding me that solitude might be a shared state. This small cabin, adrift in a sea of whispering pines and vacant fields, miles from the nearest constellation of streetlights, 20 minutes by car from the town's edge, it was meant to be sanctuary, solitude's embrace, fertile ground for focus, and for the first few months it delivered. Birdsong stitched the mornings together, deer ghosted along the tree line, the vast yard breathed openness. Nights possessed a profound quietude, sometimes unnervingly so, a stillness I initially craved, now transmuted into a brittle tension the moment dusk bleeds across the sky. Then came the fracture, deep in the marrow of a moonless night. 2 a.m., perhaps. A choked yelp, sharp and solitary, tearing the fabric of stillness. Coyote, I reasoned, or some stray hound tracing forgotten scents across my land. Surely it would pass. Rising, I peered through the window pane, but the cloud-shrouded moon rendered the yard a uniform, impenetrable umbra. Back in bed, I willed it away. Daylight revealed nothing amiss. The grass lay undisturbed. No telltale prints marred the soft earth near the house. I dismissed it. The following night, the sound returned, amplified, insistent. A raw, distressed timbre that resonated strangely, as if echoing from the bottom of a well. Drawn first to the living room window, I parted the blinds. Nothing but the familiar emptiness bathed in the cold glare of the floodlight. Normalcy's mask. Resolve hardening, I pulled on boots, flicked the porch switch, and stepped into the chill air. Goose flesh prickled my arms. The flashlight beam sliced the darkness, sweeping the perimeter. No animal, no flicker of movement. But there, gleaming faintly on the weathered planks, damp impressions. Not paws, not boots, abstract patches of moisture, slick and dark, beginning inexplicably mid-porch, leading directly to my threshold and ceasing. No source, no trail leading away, just stopped. The barking ceased too, swallowed by the sudden airless silence. A cold fist closed around my gut. Retreating inside, the deadbolt slid home with a hollow click. I stood frozen, listening to the frantic percussion of my own heart, breath shallow. A neighbor's dog, lost, but unseen, vanished. Sleep was a lost cause, the faint barking resuming its phantom patrol. Now behind the house, now near the side windows, then the porch again. A relentless circling. Exhaustion claimed me only with the dawn. Days bled into nights, each punctuated by the phantom canine chorus. Dusk, midnight, the gray hour before dawn, its timing arbitrary, its presence relentless. Each yelp sent me scrambling, peering through glass, stepping onto dew-kissed grass with a lamp, finding only absence. But the damp sigils multiplied. On the porch, the back steps, the flagstone path winding toward the woods. Always originating from nowhere, always terminating abruptly at some barrier. A wall, a door. One particular night, the darkness felt absolute, the moon devoured by clouds. The barking swelled, a frantic, echoing clamor that seemed to vibrate in my bones. Flashlight clenched, I circled the cabin's perimeter, the beam trembling, cutting futile arcs through the oppressive black. Who's there? My voice, thin and reedy against the vastness. Silence answered, broken moments later by barking from a new vector. Taunton. A cold sweat beaded on my skin despite the night's chill. Then, a fleeting contact against my calf. Light, swift, like the passage of unseen fur. My beam stabbed downwards, empty earth. A wave of nausea surged. I spun, light flaring wildly. "Damn you!" The words ripped out, ragged. The barking died instantly. Scrabbling back inside, the bolt rammed home. I leaned against the door, breath catching in ragged gasps, skin clammy. What unseen thing played this game? Pacing the living room, I flipped every switch, bathing the house in defiant light, leaving the porch beacon burning. Eventually, I collapsed onto the sofa, staring at the door, waiting. Silence held until the sun finally bled over the horizon. I hadn't slept. Defiance flickered. Cameras were mounted the next evening, sentinel eyes aimed at porch and yard. If it existed, technology would trap its image. That night, cocooned in artificial light, I watched the monitor feeds. Midnight struck. The barking commenced. A distant thread of sound. Through the walls, undeniable. On screen, static hiss, wind-shivered leaves, nothing more. My own nervous energy vibrated through the chair. Closer now, the barking surged, seeming to emanate from the very porch floorboards displayed empty on a monitor. A faint scratch whispered from the front door. I froze, pulse hammering against my ribs. Monitor unwavering, empty porch. Slowly, heart a frantic drum, I approached the door. The scratching softened, insistent, hand trembling on the cold metal knob. A fractional turn, a sliver of opening. Frigid air rushed in. Below, glistening under the porch lamp, the wet impressions led right to the threshold, pooling slightly where they ended. The yard beyond lay inert. The barking vanished. A chill, sharp as ice, traced my spine, eyes watering from sheer unblinking tension. I realized I was holding my breath. An explosive exhale. Then the door slammed shut. The deadbolt a small, inadequate thunderclap. Sleep offered no refuge. Each dawn found me frayed, questioning the tapestry of reality itself. The nights seemed to distend, the sun reluctant to climb. Darkness, I noted, particularly moonless darkness, seemed to embolden the sound, give it substance. By day, I'd stand where the damp marks appeared, searching for any rational trace. Pooled water, disturbed soil, nothing, as if conjured from the air itself. Taking out the refuse bin days later, twilight already deepening into night. On the return path, that same spectral brush against my leg, a full-body flinch, flashlight beam jerking wildly, nothing. Then, erupting mere feet away, a sharp, violent bark. The light found only empty grass, the cabin siding. My own blood roared in my ears. The barking danced around me, near, far, near again, a dizzying, predatory orbit. No, a choked whisper. I bolted, fumbling the key, tumbling inside, the door slamming shut. My hands shook for long minutes after. The cameras remained stubbornly blind, hours of footage yielding only ambiguous flickers, phantom movements at the edge of perception. The barking registered as mere atmospheric noise, if at all. One night, resigned, I sat in the darkened rear study, phone set to record audio on the sill. Around 1 it began, a steady, insistent baying that stretched for minutes. Twigs snapped nearby, wind sighed through the eaves. The barking intensified, seeming to press against the very window pane. A low, guttural growl followed, raising the hairs on my nape. I surged upright, muscles locked, refusing light or sight, simply listening. A scrape against the outer wall, then profound silence. The recording captured it all. The chilling clarity of the barks, the menacing growl. Undeniable sound, inexplicable source. What could I do with such proof? Dread became my constant companion. Repairing a warped porch board late one afternoon, the air thick with the metallic tang of impending thunder, the sky bruised purple. Hammering quickly against the rising wind, I straightened and froze. A cold pocket of air clung behind me. Before the back door, stark against the dry wood, lay a single, fresh, wet impression. Perfectly formed, utterly sourceless. My breath hitched. Thunder rumbled, a low growl mirroring the one on my recording. Tools forgotten, I retreated inside, securing the lock. That night, the storm broke and the barking returned, frenzied, urgent, weaving itself into the symphony of wind and crashing rain. Pacing, peering through lightning-illuminated windows, the yard, a momentary photograph of emptiness. Then, a scrape at the front door, sharper this time. Ear pressed to the wood, I heard a thin whimpering, punctuated by choked bark. The knob vibrated faintly. Lightning flared again, etching a fleeting shadow slinking past the window onto my retinas. Gone. I recoiled, legs unsteady. Thunder shook the foundations. The knob rattled once, twice, then stilled. The barking receded, moving around the house, eventually dissolving into the storm's fury. Hours later, in the bruised quiet after the rain, I ventured out. The porch dripped. More wet sigils scattered haphazardly, leading nowhere, vanishing into the sodden grass yards from the steps. I stood shivering in the damp, heavy air, listening to the ragged rhythm of my own breathing. The cycle continued. Nights shattered by lone yelps or stretched thin by hours of relentless baying. Leave, I'd whisper into the dark, a futile prayer. Offerings of food left on the porch remained untouched. A dusting of flour captured only the wind's patterns, and, inevitably, those same inexplicable damp patches materializing on its surface, leading to my door, ending. And so I sit, here in the heart of my besieged sanctuary, listening. The barking persists, a phantom limb attached to the night. Clouds smother the moon. Another vigil stretches before me. My throat is dust. Every muscle is wire taut. My gaze flicks constantly to the windows, anticipating a flicker of movement in the periphery. What hunger drives it? What purpose holds it tethered to this place? Those damp trails mark its passage, ending always at my door, vanishing before they can be traced. Sometimes the brush against my skin, the ghost touch in the dark. Leaving feels like surrender, yet this is no longer home. It is a cage. I don't know how to silence the sound, sever the connection. Is it animal or aberration? It draws nearer, I feel it. The barks grow bolder, the footprints more defined. The darkness itself seems to linger, pooling around the foundations. Sleep is a forgotten country. I pace, I wait, I listen for the inevitable fade that signals dawn's distant promise. Tonight, it comes in sharp, staccato bursts. Behind the house, then suddenly at the threshold. A prickling sensation crawls my skin. My pulse refuses peace. Dawn feels an eternity away. The barking continues, unrelenting. Each check reveals only emptiness, save for those glistening signatures that bloom from nowhere. Something is out there. It craves notice. Why, I cannot fathom, nor what awaits when its patience finally frays. I only know I am trapped in the listening, the waiting. Right now, it calls again, and the familiar terror floods my chest, my hands trembling beyond control. This unseen sentinel patrols my perimeter. It scratches at my door, and I am utterly alone inside, paralyzed by the sound, dreading the moment I might finally see. The bus sighed its brakes, releasing me into the amber wash of late afternoon. I disembarked onto the main thoroughfare, a ribbon of worn asphalt winding through the town. A scattering of figures moved with the languor of the day's end. Arms laden with provisions, bodies slumped on benches outside shuttered storefronts, their glances sliding past me, incurious. My destination, the guest house, lay at the town's frayed edge, huddled against a scar of ancient railway lines. It presented a modest face, clad in paint the color of faded moss, fronted by a timber porch that groaned underfoot, and a screen door that whined its welcome. A premonitory coolness, incongruous beneath the lingering sun, touched my skin as I drew near. I dismissed it then. My thoughts narrowed to the simple comforts. A room, sustenance, a pause in my journey. Inside, the air hung thick with stillness. Behind a scarred counter stood a woman, her expression placid. She exchanged a key for my name, gesturing vaguely towards the upper floor. With a murmured thanks, I wrestled my luggage up the constricted staircase, the treads complaining beneath my weight, and located my designated room at the corridor's terminus. Once inside, seeking to displace the room's stale breath, I wrestled with the window. Dust motes danced in the invading light, disturbed from the tired curtains. The hinges shrieked in protest. Beyond the grimy pane, perhaps 30 yards distant, lay the derelict tracks. Weeds thrust defiantly through ballast, their green choked by the rust blooming thick on the iron rails. An ossified silence reigned over them, testament to decades of neglect. It was a tableau of abandonment, yet possessed of a strange, desolate peace. I unpacked essentials, splashed water on my face from the cramped basin, and descended again to inquire about the evening meal. The woman, Martha, she offered, indicated a small dining space tucked away at the back, its air savory with the promise of stew. I took a seat at one of the heavy, time-worn tables. While awaiting my meal, the low murmur of conversation drifted from a nearby table occupied by two elderly men. Their words painted pictures of a bygone era, a time when the adjacent station pulsed with life. One, Silas, lamented the lost rhythm of the trains. The other, Abram, shook his head, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper about tracks best left undisturbed. I held my silence, an unintentional eavesdropper. Soon, a bowl of steaming stew arrived, hearty and restorative after the long hours on the road, and I turned my attention wholly to it. Sated, I retreated early to the quiet solitude of my room. Sleep dissolved near midnight, fractured by a sound slicing through the profound quiet. A train whistle, distant yet distinct. It keened again, a low, melancholic sigh that hung in the air for a few heartbeats before dissolving. I lay suspended between waken and dream, straining to hear. The night held its breath. Then, unmistakably, the whistle sounded a third time, sharper now, seeming to emanate from the forsaken tracks outside. My pulse quickened. I rose, slid from the bed, and pushed the window open wider, leaning into the cool night. A sudden gust stirred the tall grasses below, making them whisper secrets to the darkness. No locomotive disturbed the scene, only shadows and the skeletal rails gleaming faintly under the moon. Yet the whistle persisted, a periodic lament that neither approached nor fully retreated. Finally, closing the window against the sound and the sudden chill, I perched on the edge of the mattress. A peculiar magnetism tugged at me, an irrational urge to venture out, to confront the source of the phantom call. But inertia, or perhaps a nascent fear, held me captive. I waited until the sound finally ceased, then drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning found me questioning Martha at the counter. Had she heard anything unusual? A train, perhaps? Her gaze was politely blank. No trains had run on those lines since the 70s, she stated, a fact echoed by another guest, a Mr. Henderson nursing coffee nearby, who suggested the wind sighing through the pines. I knew the sound hadn't been wind, its metallic sorrow too precise, too mournful, but I offered a shrug, letting the matter drop. The day unfolded in aimless wandering, a local diner, a hardware store stocked with dusty relics, a diminutive library tucked onto a corner. The townsfolk offered a reserved friendliness, yet their eyes held a certain wariness, the guarded look reserved for transients. Twice, upon learning where I lodged, locals volunteered variations of the same sentiment. "You won't be seeing any trains down there now." The words felt less like information, more like an oblique warning. That evening, sleep was a deliberate pursuit. I attempted to lose myself in a tattered paperback, but my gaze kept straying to the clock face. Midnight arrived, pregnant with anticipation. As if summoned, the whistle pierced the silence, fainter this time, more ethereal, yet undeniably present. I sat bolt upright, waiting, my palms slick with sweat. A strange yearning surfaced. I needed to hear it again, needed confirmation that my senses weren't betraying me. When the sound recurred, I was on my feet, shrugging into my jacket, moving silently from my room. Down the shadowed stairs, past the unlit lobby, and out through the complaining screen door I went. The night air bit raisin goose flesh. My eyes sought the tracks. A faint luminescence hovered above them, a spectral glow that seemed to drift along the rails. Compelled, I moved closer, the thudding of my heart loud in my ears. The whistle cried out once more, a sharp, piercing note, then subsided. What I saw resembled not a train, but disembodied lights, like phantom lanterns bobbing and weaving in the darkness. Behind me, the pension porch groaned. Silas, one of the old men from the dining room, emerged into the night. "What are you about?" he rasped. I gestured towards the phenomenon, admitting I sought the train. He stared towards the tracks for a long moment, his silhouette stark against the dim light from the doorway, then simply shook his head. "Best come inside," he advised, offering no further word. I retreated, the mystery deepening, sleep a distant prospect as the image of those drifting lights burned behind my eyelids. In the ensuing days, the abandoned line exerted a growing fascination. The derelict station, in particular, beckoned. A local mentioned it stood a half-mile down the rusted rails. Was it accessible? A shrug. Deserted, mostly intact, they thought. So, as dusk began to bleed purple and orange across the sky one late afternoon, I set out. My boots crunched on the gravel path beside the rails, the silence broken only by my own passage and the sigh of the wind through the tall weeds choking the ties. Ahead, the silhouette of a small structure emerged from the gloom, one side of its roof sagging inward like a broken wing. The station. Boarded windows stared blankly, but the main door hung slightly open, an invitation or a warning. I pushed it inward. The hinges screamed. Dust lay thick as velvet over everything inside. Overturned furniture, scattered papers yellowed with age, the skeletal remains of chairs. The air was cloying, heavy with the scent of decay and trapped time. Unease prickled my skin. Shadows clung stubbornly to the corners, defying the weak beam of my flashlight. After a few cursory minutes, the oppressive atmosphere drove me back out, with a half-formed promise to return under the full light of day. That night, close to the witching hour, the wind rose to a frantic pitch, rattling the window panes in my room with such violence I feared they might shatter. I sat up, heart hammering against my ribs, and then came the whistle, louder than ever before, a raw, urgent summons that resonated deep in my bones. Goose flesh erupted across my skin. Dressing hastily, I grabbed my coat and flashlight and slipped out of the room, descending into the empty, waiting darkness of the guest house. Outside, the wind tore at me, whipping my hair across my face, forcing me to lean into its assault. The air had acquired a biting edge. My breath plumed white. I flicked on the flashlight, its beam cutting a nervous path towards the tracks. The lights were there again, the same spectral glow, but closer now, drifting inexorably towards me along the rails, fading and reappearing like phantoms playing hide and seek. The whistle shrieked again, seemingly just down the line. I began to walk towards the lights, my feet sinking slightly into the soft earth beside the track bed. Questions swirled, a frantic eddy in my mind, but the pull towards the phenomenon was stronger. I needed to see. Was it a trick? A prank orchestrated by unseen hands? But the night was empty of human presence. I was utterly alone with the wind and the lights and the sound. The whistle blasted, a deafening cacophony that made me clap my hands over my ears. My flashlight beam flickered, threatening to die. The lights on the rails flared, impossibly bright for an instant, then vanished utterly. I stood, gasping for breath, shivering uncontrollably in the sudden, profound silence that followed. The wind seemed to momentarily relent, leaving only the cold and the echo of the whistle ringing in my ears. After several minutes suspended in that frozen tableau, I turned and stumbled back towards the dubious sanctuary of the pension. The following morning's inquiries yielded little more than furtive glances and tight-lipped dismissals. Some townsfolk offered blank stares, others muttered warnings about minding my own affairs. Lena, the clerk at the general store, provided a sliver of validation, admitting I wasn't the first newcomer to speak of nocturnal trains and inexplicable lights. No explanations were forthcoming, however, just whispers and folklore dismissed by daylight. Frustration warred with a deepening, almost obsessive curiosity. One part of me screamed to pack my bags and flee this place haunted by echoes. Another felt irrevocably anchored, compelled to unearth the truth, whatever it might be. That evening, I resolved to keep vigil from my window, extinguishing the lamp to better perceive the night. Midnight tolled, and the whistle returned, its vibration palpable through the glass, which trembled with each mournful cry. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Sweat beaded on my forehead, though my skin felt icy. The lights materialized, drifting along the tracks with a slow, deliberate cadence, as if searching. Then the wind surged, stirring the curtains behind me like ghostly hands. I snatched my jacket, my gaze locked on the scene outside. The lights halted mere yards from the pension. A silhouette seemed to coalesce within their glow, vast and indistinct, before the whistle screamed one final time and the lights winked out, leaving only the wind and my own ragged breathing in the dark room. No train, no answers. Just me, trembling and alone. The next day, a conviction hardened within me. I had to witness this from the station itself, at the heart of the phenomenon. Waiting until the town had settled into slumber around 11, I ventured out again, flashlight beam dancing ahead on the treacherous path beside the tracks. Reaching the derelict station, I found the door now ripped entirely from its hinges, lying splintered on the floor within. The boards over the windows had warped or been pried, leaving gaps through which the wind moaned, a low, desolate sound. I stepped inside, the sense of unease more potent than before. My light swept across faded advertisements peeling from the walls, glinted off a shard of broken mirror leaning in a corner. My reflection stared back, pale and wide-eyed. The frantic pulse in my ears seemed to fill the small, decaying space. Precisely at midnight, the whistle erupted, so close, so loud, it felt like a physical blow to my chest. All caution abandoned, I bolted outside onto the crumbling platform. The lights were already approaching from the far end of the line, heading directly towards the station, towards me. A powerful, irrational urge surged through me. Step forward, meet them, be consumed by them. My breath came in shallow, painful gasps. This time, surely, I would see its form, the iron and steel reality behind the spectral glow. The lights drew nearer, blindingly bright, unwavering. The ground beneath my feet began to vibrate, a low thrumming that resonated up through my bones. Simultaneously, the temperature plummeted, the air turning instantly, bitingly frigid. My eyes streamed against the cold and the intensity of the light. Shielding my face, I braced myself for the roar of an engine, the shriek of metal on metal, the undeniable presence of a massive locomotive. But only the deafening whistle filled the world. I stumbled back, flashlight trembling violently in my grip. Dust and debris swirled around the platform edge. The station's remaining windows rattled furiously. My body was rigid with terror and anticipation. The lights were almost upon me, threatening to engulf the station, engulf me. And then they stopped, perhaps 10 feet away. They hovered, flickering, pulsing. No engine, no cars, no substance. Just light. Pure, disembodied light. Then, as suddenly as it began, the whistle ceased. A thick, ringing silence descended, broken only by the frantic pounding in my chest and the lingering moan of the wind. My face felt numb. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, suspended in the aftermath. Slowly, reluctantly, the lights began to dim, fading like dying embers, until only the oppressive darkness remained. The urge to approach lingered. A magnetic pull. But fear held me fast, rooting me to the spot. Eventually, the last vestiges of light vanished, leaving me alone on the derelict platform, the cold seeping into my bones. Returning to the pension near 1 a.m, I closed my door with exaggerated care and collapsed onto the bed, my heart still a frantic drum against my ribs. My mind raced, replaying the impossible scene. Fear was a cold knot in my stomach, yet tangled with it was a strange, exhilarating thrill. What had I witnessed? What would happen if those lights, that sound, ever truly arrived? Would something emerge? Would the ghost take solid form? Sleep offered little respite. I lingered for several more days, caught in the town's strange orbit, half praying for the nightly phenomena to cease, half desperate for some form of resolution. Each night the ritual repeated, perhaps intensifying. The wind seemed to howl with greater fury, the whistle gained a sharper, more piercing edge, the vibrations shaking my room more violently. Restlessness consumed me. I paced my small room until the first mournful cry echoed through the darkness, then hurried outside, drawn inexorably towards the tracks. The lights continued their spectral dance, sometimes distant and teasing, sometimes sweeping alarmingly close before retreating, always elusive, never resolving into anything tangible. On my final night, I wrapped myself in a blanket and sat on the creaking porch swing, watching the darkness coalesce. The temperature plunged as midnight drew near. Then came the whistle, sharp and clear, triggering the familiar cascade of adrenaline and dread. My hands trembled. My mouth was desert dry. Down the line, the lights flickered into existence. I watched them, forcing myself to remain seated, though every nerve screamed at me to run towards the station, towards the heart of the mystery. I saw the tall grass bowing in the wind, the glint of moonlight on rusted steel, the ethereal glow hovering just above the rails. The thought of leaving in the morning surfaced, rational and sensible, but a deeper, more potent current held me fast. The overwhelming need to know what would happen should that phantom train finally complete its journey, finally pull alongside this decaying station, this weathered pension. The why of it remained elusive, a visceral compulsion, a magnetic field drawing me closer, night after terrifying night. Whether a train of iron and steam will ever materialize from the lights and sound, I cannot say. Whether this nightly haunting will cease or continue indefinitely, trapping me in its cycle, remains unknown. The townspeople maintain their silence, their indifference a wall against my questions. As I recount this, I feel the phantom chill on my skin again, hear the echo of that distant, desolate cry in my ears. It is nearing midnight now. Outside, the wind is rising, rattling the windows, catching my breath in my throat. Faint lights flicker into view, moving along the skeletal tracks, closer now, always closer. I don't know what I will do when they reach the station, if they ever truly reach it, but I cannot look away. I cannot stop listening, and I cannot shake the chill uncertainty that sooner or later I might see more than just lights. I might witness the arrival, and when that moment comes, I know I will be here, waiting, heart threatening to burst, hands shaking, but waiting still.